Hey guys, and welcome to Should You Buy It, where all we do is talk a little bit about the game and whether or not we think it's worth the cost.
In this episode, we'll be playing Warhammer Vermintide 2, the medieval co-op first-person game where you and up to 3 friends must hack and slash your way through hordes of enemies. If you like seeing ketchup come out of your foes and cooking them to a nice crisp, then this just might be the game for you.
So the first question that we always cover in these videos is what stage of development is the game in? And in this case, Warhammer Vermintide 2 is in full release and available on PC as well as most consoles for $30.
So what exactly is Warhammer Vermintide 2? Well, this is a game much similar to Left 4 Dead 1 and 2 in the sense that you will be attacked by several hordes and special types of enemies on your way to what essentially acts as an extraction point. However, there are quite a few differences between these games, so let's dive on in by talking about the hero selection.
So in Vermintide 2, you will be given an option to choose between 5 heroes, each of which present a different set of tools and traits that will help them to take care of enemies or help allies in the midst of combat. If you decided to say go with the Elven Archer, you can expect yourself to have a lot of arrows and ranged abilities. This means you will most likely be dealing with the thinning out of hordes before they can reach you and killing off elites from a distance. Keep in mind though that each of these 5 heroes have separate subclasses that will drastically change the way in which you play them.
For an example, if you choose to play the dwarf character, you could decide to play a crowd control playstyle where you use flamethrowers or explosive pistols to thin out enemies while also using hammer and shield to play a sort of tank. Then again, you could also choose to play a more of a barbarian style dwarf who only thinks about hacking and slashing his way through hordes of enemies. This makes a game with 5 playable characters feel like a game with significantly more than that.
Now, if you haven't been satisfied with the amount of character customization yet, don't worry, as the game does go a step further in allowing you to choose your gear. You see, each character has their own weapon types as well as additional accessories that they are able to customize to fit their playstyle. This could be just any medieval style weapon that you could imagine. You'll see things like rapiers, spears, maces, mini Gatling guns, fire staffs, swords, and much, much more. Each of these weapon types play an important role and aren't just cosmetic changes either. Just to give you an example, a spear is great for jabbing strong enemies in the face from a bit of a distance, or stabbing through the gaps in your allies, while using a large two-handed sword is much better for clearing waves of small enemies without any armor. There are also lots of minor traits on each piece of gear that you are wearing, as well as legendary ones, but essentially this works in a similar way to other loot games where you get something like 10% more crit damage, or maybe something more powerful and impactful on a legendary item like a complete change in the way the weapon works.
So how do we actually obtain all this amazing loot and unlock all the different classes? Well, we get the loot by completing missions. You see, each time you complete a mission, you will be awarded a loot crate with a rarity based on a few different factors. This will be decided based on whether or not you were able to complete the mission, if you played on quick play, collected any tomes or grimoires, which are hidden items that will give you a debuff on each map, how many loot dice you found, and finally just a random chance. As you can imagine, the higher your rarity of chest, the better loot you will obtain from your loot crate. Of course, they try to give you a higher likelihood of getting loot for the character you are actually playing, just to go that extra step.
Each subclass for each hero will also have their own talent tree. Now, the way that we get these talents are going to be through leveling up your hero via simply playing the game as said hero. Don't worry too much though, as each hero will also get XP for each of its subclasses at the same time. This means if you go from playing the ranged elf to the melee elf, you're still going to have the same level on both characters. If you couldn't tell already, you will also unlock each of the subclasses at a certain level for each individual character as well.
Okay, so now that we've made it through talking about all the characters, subclasses, and each of their gear sets, can we finally talk about the gameplay? Well, yes, we can, but let's explain the progression of gameplay before talking about its mechanics. You see, the game has 4 different difficulty options for you to choose from. These in order are Recruit, Veteran, Champion, Legend, and Cataclysm if you have purchased the DLC. The best way to think of this is more of a progression rather than an actual difficulty setting, the same way you would with something like Diablo. You see, each difficulty is based around the idea that you have a certain gear level and thus drops gear of higher level as you progress through them. So Recruit would be for brand new level 1 characters trying to learn the game and get a few decent items, whereas Veteran would be for level 5 to 15 players who know the basics and have a bit of gear.
Now, I feel it's important to at the very least mention going from veteran to champion or legend is a big jump. This is because it will force you to almost relearn the game. What I mean by this is that both of those difficulties include team damage, so you can't exactly just run in and start swinging your sword around without a care in the world, or you're going to knock out your own ally. This may sound very simple and easy to deal with at first, but as you try it for the first time, you will quickly find out that team damage is probably going to be the main cause of HP loss at the higher difficulties. To be completely honest with you, I love this, as Recruit and Veteran feel great for casual players, but the more advanced groups will want a challenge, and Champions and above will definitely provide that.
Okay, so now that we're actually in the game, what's it like? Well, you'll spawn in with your team and have to try to get to a certain objective, then complete it and escape. You'll be running into consistent swarms of enemies, as well as many elites and specials, just to spice things up. These can include things like warp fire throwers who will use Gatling guns, gas rats who throw smoke bombs, hook rats who will grab you by the throat and run away with you, or mini bosses which essentially act something like a tank from Left 4 Dead 2. These mini bosses will spawn in and create an immediate challenge for you and your team to overcome. Each of them pack a punch and can 1 or 2 shot you on the higher difficulties, and just to make things more interesting, each one has a different set of abilities and attacks that they will perform. For example, there's one that will pick you up and try to eat an ally to regain health, while another sprays bullets everywhere and has a small baby rat on its back as a weak point. No matter which one you come across, it's definitely going to take a bit of coordination and some teamwork in order to take these guys down.
Now, on your way to the extraction point, you will also have to deal with your health bar as well as picking up items. You see, when you take damage, most characters cannot regenerate their HP without help from a potion or a health pack. However, these items are limited, so if you aren't careful, you'll find yourself running out of them quite quickly and being unable to complete the end challenge of each stage due to simply just not having enough HP to deal with it. Now, when you do eventually hit 0 HP, you will go into a down state in which you are able to be revived by an ally. However, keep in mind, depending on your difficulty setting, this will be allowed to occur less and less the harder the game gets. When you are picked up from a down state, you will be given a temporary HP bar that slowly depletes over time. If you fail to find a healing item before that bar reaches 0, then you will be sitting at 1 HP. If you do die too many times throughout the run, you will then finally fully die and be sent to a separate spectate mode. This is fine though, as after about 30 seconds you will appear as captured somewhere on the map and your team will be given the opportunity to save you. Just keep in mind, any items that you were carrying will have been dropped and you will tend to be a bit out of your team's way.
As far as combat goes, every character will have a few similar controls that are universal. You have a quick attack just to get a quick swing on a small enemy, and a heavy attack which will pack more of a punch and is usually better for dealing with hordes if it's a slashing weapon, whereas stabbing and blunt ones will be better at dealing with bosses or armored opponents. Of course, headshots are always best as you get a little bit better damage, even with melee weapons. Now each character will also have stamina, which is represented by a shield icon when blocking. This is essentially the number of attacks you can block or shove before your block is broken and you start taking damage. Shoves will stagger a group of enemies in front of you, which is going to be super important for later difficulties. Finally, each class will have its own special. These can range from a powerful single shot attack to a dash that creates a wall of flames burning enemies. These work in similar fashion to ultimates in Overwatch as they charge up based on damage and time.
Now, there is a lot more I could talk about in this game, but before we move on to the pros and cons, we need to at least mention the new game mode. Chaos Waste is essentially a mini roguelike within Vermintide 2. In this, you will be tasked with completing a series of missions in order to reach your objective. However, you will be able to collect coins along the way that you can spend at altars or trade posts to give your character or a team an upgrade. These could be things like extra health when someone is revived to simply causing your ultimate charge to charge up faster. You will also be able to choose the path you want to take between each mission, as some will have different debuffs or monster types than others that your party may or may not be better at dealing with.
So now it's time for the pros and cons section for the video. First up for the pros is that Vermintide 2 has a great progression system compared to other similar games like Left 4 Dead. This gives the game great replayability value, as just to get each character to max level will take you close to 100 plus hours. Next up for the pros is that there are just tons of class and character options. Even though the game offers 5 characters, each comes with 3 to 4 subclasses that will drastically change the way that they play. After that is that the game is enjoyable no matter what difficulty that you want to play on. This means that casual players can enjoy the game while also leaving plenty of room for experienced players to have enough of a challenge. And last for the pros is that the graphics were honestly surprisingly good for a $30 game.
Now for the cons. The first con on our list today is going to be that the peer-to-peer servers can cause some lag if you're not in a highly populated area such as the US or EU. I mean, there's not a lot to say here. If you're not in the US or EU, you might be experiencing some lag. Maybe Oceania will be okay, but I have heard rumors that out there in Oceania, it tends to get quite a bit worse. Lastly, for the cons, we have that this game can just get a bit repetitive, and what we mean by this is that when you're playing this game, at the end of the day, you're still hacking and slashing through enemies, you're still using weapons and going through them and abilities and stuff, but it just gets repetitive. You can only play so many different heroes so many different times against the AI, and once you start to figure out how things work, there's not really a lot of change between each time you play it. The new game mode, Chaos Waste, does help with this, but at the end of the day, it's definitely a con for me, as I found myself getting a little bored after about 30 or 40 hours into it as it started to get a bit repetitive.
So now it's time for the rating for the game, and when we rate games, we want to get 1 hour of enjoyment out of every $1 that we spend on the game. So for this game in particular, in Warhammer Vermintide 2, we would want to get roughly 30 hours of enjoyment out of the $30 that we spent. And after putting 24 played hours into this game, we give it 8 out of 10 potatoes.
Yeah, Warhammer Vermintide 2 was honestly a great game. It just feels so satisfying to hack and slash your way through hordes and hordes of enemies. If you ever wanted a fantasy-style Left 4 Dead game, then, well, you've certainly found it. We will say that there has been a lot of complaints about there being no dedicated servers and having to use the peer-to-peer system, but if you live in a populated area like we do, this shouldn't really be much of a problem. If you have a friend or two that's willing to play this with you, then you're going to have an absolutely great time, especially at the higher difficulties where it is super important to work as a team. And if you or they are on the fence about this game, then just wait for it to go on sale or try it on a free weekend, as Steam tends to have these quite often. That being said, even at a $30 price point, we feel it is more than safe to say that Warhammer Vermintide 2 is definitely worth the cost.
Now, if you guys want more money-saving content, consider subscribing to our channel, where we release new videos every single week, where we spend the money so you don't have to. If you're interested in becoming part of our community, then check out our Discord channel, and as always, thank you so much for watching, and we will see you next time.